You're standing on a slab that's been waiting weeks for a finish, and the question buzzing in your head is simple. Do I spend another night wrestling with a cheap grinder that splatters dust everywhere? Or do I pull out a machine that actually lets me get the job done without turning my garage into a construction site? Most of us want something that won't quit on the first big patch, that stays manageable when the dust starts to rise, and that justifies the price tag by delivering a floor that looks finished, not just worked on. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I first started looking at concrete floor grinders, the market felt like a minefield. There are units that promise industrial-grade power, but come with a massive, noisy motor that makes you wish you'd hired a pro instead. Then there are the tiny handheld polishers that barely grind past a thin coat of paint. I spent a few evenings scrolling through forums, watching a handful of YouTube teardown videos, and reading the handful of buyer comments on similar models. The biggest complaints kept circling around two things: dust everywhere and a motor that overheats after a short run. That's why the WYDDDARY concrete floor grinder caught my eye. It claims a pure copper motor for durability, a built-in dust-free system, and a 30-liter bucket that promises to keep the work area clean. First, let's talk about the setup. The unit arrives in a fairly compact crate with everything you need to start grinding right away. The main grinder, a 30-liter dust collection bucket, 6 grinding heads of varying coarseness, a power cord, and a quick start guide. No extra accessories to hunt down, no need to buy a separate vacuum. The bucket hooks onto the underside of the machine with a simple latch, and the dust extraction hose slides into the port. I've used a 4-inch shop vacuum on similar tools before, and the built-in system on this grinder actually reduced the amount of airborne particles by a noticeable margin. My coworker, who has a mild dust allergy, didn't have to leave the room halfway through the job. The pure copper motor is the kind of claim that usually feels like marketing fluff, but here it makes a practical difference. Copper windings tend to handle heat better than aluminum, meaning the motor can run longer before it starts to throttle back. In a real-world scenario, I was polishing a 500-square-foot terrazzo floor for a client's boutique. I ran the grinder continuously for about 45 minutes, switching between the coarse and fine heads as the surface transitioned from rough to glossy. The motor stayed steady. There was no sudden drop in RPM, no strange humming that signals a struggling motor. That kind of consistency is what keeps a floor from ending up with uneven patches. Now, the dust-free operation is where the machine truly shows its value. The 30-liter bucket fills up slower than you'd expect because the system pulls the dust through a fine filter before it reaches the bucket. In my test, after an hour of grinding, the bucket was about half full, and the filter only needed a quick tap to shake off any clogs. Compare that to a standard grinder where you have to stop every few minutes to empty a small bag or change a disposable filter. The reduced downtime translates directly into labor savings, which is where the cost-effectiveness starts to show. Who should consider this grinder? If you're a small to medium contractor who regularly tackles concrete, epoxy, or terrazzo surfaces and you need a machine that can move between jobs without a full shop floor setup, this is a solid pick. It's also a good fit for serious DIY homeowners who are planning a garage makeover or a basement renovation that involves polishing the slab. The 6 grinding heads give you enough flexibility to start with a rough grit for a heavily pitted surface and finish with a fine pad for a mirror-like shine, all without buying extra accessories. On the flip side, there are people who should probably look elsewhere. If your typical job is a quick patch on a single-room floor, the size of this unit might feel overkill. The 220-volt requirement also means you need a dedicated outlet, which isn't always handy on a residential job site. Also, while the dust bucket is generous, it does add a bit of bulk, so maneuvering the machine in tight corners can be a little unwieldy. I found that when I tried to grind close to a wall, I had to tilt the unit and use the side of the bucket as a brace. Nothing you can't do, but it does require a bit of extra care. Practical strengths beyond the motor and dust system include the high efficiency that the manufacturer talks about. In plain terms, the grinder does more work per minute because the power is delivered smoothly to the grinding heads. When I was moving from a rough concrete slab to a polished epoxy overlay, the transition felt seamless. The machine didn't bog down when I switched from a 30-grain head to a 120-grain pad. That efficiency also helps when you're dealing with a larger surface area. Less